This is going to be a short tutorial on the Western Redcedar Dieback study. This is an independent volunteer opportunity that we're just letting people know about. This isn't a CFC-led project. It's actually a huge collaboration of different agencies and entities throughout the Pacific Northwest. Our board member, Bob Robeson, brought this study to our attention, and we thought it would be a really great thing for folks to go out and do. You're basically just recording healthy cedars and cedars that are experiencing dieback or perhaps have already died. They're trying to collect data throughout the Pacific Northwest on the state of Western red cedars. And so a lot of you, are just out hiking, backpacking, doing some sort of recreation where you're likely passing these trees. So having the iNaturalist app on your phone and learning how to collect the data seemed like a good idea for our friends and supporters and volunteers that are out there in the woods all the time and can record this really important data. So here's just a quick outline. I'm just going to give you a bit of a background on Western red cedar biology, the habitats they're typically found in, why they're struggling, how you can help, and then what data you'll be collecting. So first, I just want to start off with something that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of these cedars found in the Pacific Northwest, but they're actually not true cedars. So the Western red cedar is one of 4 tree species in Oregon and Washington that are commonly called cedars, but are not true cedars. Similarly, there's the incense cedar, Port Orford cedar, and the yellow or Alaskan cedar that are these kind of false cedars. True cedars are native to the middle and far east, but you might see them planted in people's yards as ornamental trees, but they look rather different, and there won't be any concern for confusing those. For the false cedars, you might see yellow or Alaskan cedar where you're going to look for Western red cedars. Not the end of the world if you're unable to differentiate. You'll be taking lots of photos, so the researchers can decipher which cedar it is if you're unable to. So no worries about that, but that's probably the only other one you'll be running into unless you're more in some northern Washington, Canada areas doing this. So speaking of that, yeah, the typical range of Western red cedar is from Northern California way into Canada there, as well as Idaho and the northwest corner of Montana. They're also found in Alaska. For whatever reason, that was left off this map. Interesting fact that the ones in Northern California actually aren't native. They were planted there, and now they kind of just exist, and they do well there, but they didn't naturally get there on their own. So the climate that Western red cedar typically prefer are temperate climates with cool, wet winters and mild, moist summers. So that's well suited to regions that have abundant rainfall and high humidity. For elevation, they can be found from sea level up to mountainous areas, but they're more common at lower to middle elevations. They have needles that are scale-like, really shiny on the top, and this whitish butterfly mark on the other side. I thought that was such an interesting way to describe that. I've never heard of that, but I tried to take a really up-close photo here, and I feel like I can see what they're actually talking about. So I just highlighted that there, that yeah, like the little white areas and the like outside of the scales kind of make it look like a butterfly. So that's really cool. For the cones, they have really small cones. They're really always about a ½ inch. The bark, it's a very reddish brown, typically furrowed and peeling off in shreds. That's another pretty indicative feature of the Western red cedar. Oh, here we go. Here's a good up close photo of the cone. It also kind of has this very flower looking shape when you view it from above. And then here's the bark, very furrowed, kind of just peeling off, a mixture of gray and reddish brown. For height, they can typically grow to 150 to 200 feet tall. The canopy shape is pretty conical or pyramidal for foliage. So yeah, they have the scale-like needles, but they're arranged in a very flattened manner and kind of spread out in a branching pattern. And for the wood, so this is underneath the bark, it is also kind of a reddish brown to a almost light pinkish in color. So in terms of other environmental features that it prefers and does well in, for soil, a deep, rich, well-drained soil, high in organic matter is really great. Likes a lot of moisture, so is usually around stream banks, moist valleys, or other low-lying areas. It usually prefers gentle slopes, but can be found in other areas as long as there's maybe some protection by other vegetation. They have a moderate shade tolerance and can grow in partial shade. In the beginning of their life, they do need some direct sunlight for optimal growth and shouldn't be completely shaded by other trees. Other plants that you might see associated with Western red cedar. So and this is just all to give you an idea of when to look for them. If you're like hiking on top of Mount St. Helens, perhaps that's not where you're going to find Western red cedar, but if you're going for a riverside hike or down in a valley somewhere, then that's going to be more likely the area that you're going to find Western red cedar. And, if you're seeing a lot of sword fern or salal or Oregon grape or red or evergreen huckleberry, mixed with some Western hemlock or big leaf maple, like perhaps there might be Western red cedars around. So this is a great example here of a giant Western red cedar, and all in the understory is huckleberry and sword fern. So after that introduction, we can get into what's the issue and how can we help? So in general, Western red cedar are kind of struggling in the Pacific Northwest. So in recent years, forest health specialists, forest landowners, other land managers have observed Western red cedar dieback from Oregon throughout Western Canada. So pockets of dieback have been observed in areas where they should be thriving, such as the areas that I spoke about earlier, like along streams and in shaded areas. So the cause for this seemingly sudden and expanding dieback is currently unknown and under investigation, though there has been recent studies pointing to kind of the back-to-back droughts we've been experiencing and also the heat domes. So they're kind of getting more of an answer, but of course, more data and studying this over a longer period of time is really going to help solidify those answers. So even though they're kind of getting good data and maybe drawing some potential conclusions, they're still definitely continuing on with this study to make it a more longer term. So the specific symptoms that the researchers are seeing are called Dieback symptoms, and that can be in the form of a variety of things, including thinning crowns, branch dieback, top kill, yellow foliage, a burst of heavy cone crops, and then not necessarily dieback, but if it dies, then it dies. So mortality. So just more info on this. So dieback can refer to a large event affecting multiple trees or any other species, but it's also being used to describe the behavior of an individual tree. So it's usually used as a tactic to help survive through a difficult time. So like to adapt to drought, a tree can slow its water loss, and then it's going to reduce its growth. It can kind of just like sit there and kind of wait it out. But while that's happening, part of the tree is going to die back, usually starting around the tip of its leaves or the tip of its roots. And so you'll see this in western red cedars as dead branches, yellowing and browning of leaves, the top of the tree dying off. And so again, that's trying to be used as a survival tactic, but sometimes if conditions are too rough, then the diebacks are going to turn to die-offs. So that's what researchers are kind of seeing is what's happening. So they really want to record western red cedars in these different dieback states, and revisit these trees every year to see like, oh, did they come back from this dieback situation, or did it just continue to get worse? So that's why they created the Western Red Cedar Dieback Project to study this phenomenon. So in 2020, it was the Oregon Department of Forestry and Washington Department of Natural Resources. They received funding through the Forest Service Evaluation and Monitoring Program to try to define the extent of Western Red Cedar dieback and determine what variables are associated with this dieback. So they want to do this kind of crowdsourced community science kind of way because the different dieback symptoms, so some that I've been discussing, like the top kill or the dead branches, the yellowing, it's not really easily visible or distinguishable from damage in other conifer species if you're trying to use like an aerial detection survey. So that's kind of a way to study the forest quite a bit quicker, is doing it from aerial imagery. But for this particular study, it wouldn't work well. So they really want to observe individual trees and get them mapped and record the data that they're interested in, and then that allows to track them over time. So there's plenty of other entities involved, and there's been so many community scientists involved so far. 294 people have submitted well over 2,000 observations. I have a map here of where those observations are, so you can see there's kind of this huge concentration in the Willamette Valley. There's a lot in kind of central northern Washington, a lot near Mount Rainier. But I noticed this huge gap in Gifford Pinchot National Forest, and we all know there's tons of western red cedars there. And I know as well that they're not all doing fantastic. So we touched base with some of the project creators and said, hey, we're going to publicize this and try to get some data for you in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. So they're really excited about that because, of course, it would be great to have, spread the data real nicely across this geographical extent they're going for. So now I'm going to get into very specifically how you can help. So as I mentioned before, they want to do it in this, we're looking at individual trees. So there's a lot of trees. So the more people that can help, the better. And then that is just helping the science go faster by you sharing observations of both healthy and unhealthy western red cedar. So this is all done through iNaturalist. If you've not used iNaturalist before, it's very user-friendly. There is an app that you can download to your phone, and it can be used offline. So to get started, you simply just make an iNaturalist account. You join the Western Red Cedar Dieback Map project, which I will send the link to you, of course. And then you simply just click Add Observation. And a question that I've had before is, where can I go? If you have a western red cedar in your backyard, you can make an observation of that tree. And that's actually really great because, if you're planning on living there for a while, you'll be able to track the health of this tree. in your backyard. So that's really cool. But also, yeah, you can be deep in the forest and also recording information on Western red cedar. So really anywhere that this tree exists, you can collect data on. So I'd say the most important data. So there's a lot of data that you can collect. Some of it is optional. Some of it is what they need you to collect, and it's actually not a lot of data. But definitely the more information, the better. So I'm going to touch on the general things that you need to collect, and then also talk about some of the optional data that I think that they would really benefit from, and just kind of explain it, just so you're not seeing it for the first time on the app and being like, oh, I don't really get this, or is this super important? So I'll just touch on some of those. So I think the most important data out of all of the data that you will collect are photos, because perhaps there's not something you feel comfortable, deciding on in terms of the dieback symptom, or maybe you're like, oh, this could be an Alaskan cedar, not totally sure. All these photos are going to be seen by the researchers, so they'll be able to make determinations about different things. So they want at least 4 photos, one of the whole tree, one of the cones if present. Of course, the limbs might be pretty far away. We'll look on the ground for cones, in the immediate area. Same with needles. The bark should be really easy to get a photo of, and then the underside of the newest needles. So those are just going to be at the very tip of the branches. And again, that might be hard to get, depending on where you're seeing this tree. So, just really try your best. Again, you could even get leaves that have fallen off. They would be, right under the tree. So then the next thing they want you to record are the dieback symptoms. One of those options is no dieback, that it's a healthy tree. Then there's a variety of others. And I'm going to go through all of them right now and just show you some examples. But all of this information is conveniently in a guidebook that the researchers created. And so I will, of course, send you that link. But I just kind of wanted to go over everything here as well. So for thinning crowns, it's actually pretty obvious. The thinning trees appear more transparent. You can kind of really see the sky in the background. So yeah, these are just going to be thinner canopies that that are lacking some needles due to the dieback. And this is a good example of, this is something you could see, a thinned out canopy, and that tree may recover. But of course, you're just recording what you're seeing in that moment. And so if you see anything like this, this would be a thinning crown. So this is kind of seen throughout the tree, but maybe more focused towards the top. So these are all really good examples where it's like, okay, you're looking at the tree and I'm seeing sky through it. And I'm seeing, for example, here in this last photo, the tree to the right. If you compare those two, that's a really full crown, and that is not as full. So I would definitely deem that a thinning crown. Flagging. So this is when individual branches are observed as dying rather than the whole parts of the canopy, like the thinning canopy, or we'll see in a little bit the kind of top kill. So typically with this, the branches turn brown and then drop the needles. So here are some examples of that. We see a fairly, healthy crown overall, but there's branches sticking out here that are turning brown. So that's just a few branches, but it would still be the flagging dieback is what you would record. And for this one, it's a ton of flagging, but it's kind of all to one side here. So this would have been a really full tree, probably more like that. But all these lower branches have completely turned brown, and it's working its way up there. So dying tops, exactly how it sounds. The very tip top of the tree is dead. There can be old dead tops or newer dead tops. So the data collection form does ask you to distinguish between the two. And they're pretty easy to tell apart. So for the old dead tops, they're not going to have any needles, and the branches could even be lost as well, because just from wind and whatnot, they're going to ultimately fall off. And then the newer dead tops are likely still going to have some brown or really dried out needles attached to the top branches. So some examples of that here. This photo to the left, these are definitely older dead tops. There's absolutely no needles left. This one's lost a lot of branches at the top. This one, you can see there's still branches, but definitely no needles. These other two photos are newer dead tops. I mean, this one's almost, the needles are almost all gone on this photo to the right. And this one in the middle is definitely the newest dead top out of them all. It's definitely starting to lose things at the bottom. It almost has, you know, more of the thinning crown right below. So this middle photo is a good example of like, oh no, I'm not sure whether to distinguish between thinning crown or new dead top. And like, that's something that you can relay on iNaturalist. Of course, more photos, the better, to help researchers determine that. So no worries if you get out and you're like, oh, I'm not exactly sure how to identify this. The photos will have the answers. So this one is pretty easy to see, yellowing of the foliage. So typically Western red cedars are that very vibrant kind of Kelly green, lime green color. But there's a variety of issues that can cause the needles to yellow. So yeah, that one's really easy to determine. If the needles are brown, if they aren't green, they're a yellowish color, then that is the dieback that you would choose. There's also the browning of foliage, so turning a brown to reddish brown. Sometimes it's only a few needles, and that is often just the seasonal foliage drop. So it's more so if you're seeing this on entire branches or like the whole crown. So it's usually like late summer where the interior needles will brown and die back, and that's really normal. It's when it's the full branch or more parts of the tree turn brown where it's a problem. So here's some examples here. On the left here, very obvious, the whole tree is brown, not good. This next one, you can see that the browning is kind of taking place at the top of the tree. Also kind of down here and right there. So a lot of portions of the tree are brown. And for the last one, you can see it here up top of the whole top of the crown turning brown. And this is going through some thinning. That tree, well, none of these trees are doing well, but this one, again, kind of has multiple symptoms there. And I'm actually, as I say that, I'm actually not 100% sure if you can record multiple symptoms in the app, but there's definitely a notes section to record any additional information. So just to touch again on the normal seasonal dieback, so this is usually late summer, maybe into the fall, that needles will naturally turn yellow or brown and fall off. So this is a symptom that's considered healthy. It's shedding those old needles to not expend energy that they don't need to. Only going to want to report when it would be that this whole branch is brown. So these other photos, I feel like you can't really see very well. But yeah, if you're wondering when you're out there, definitely think about this furthest right photo. If it's kind of half and half, where the brown half is closer to the trunk and the green half is closer to the end of the needles, then that is perfectly normal. A lot of the western red cedars were affected during the 2021 heat dome, and probably the ones before, and probably the ones in 2022, and I'm sure we'll have one this year. And so you usually see this in the form of scorched or dead tips of the needle. And it's normal for it kind of to just happen on one side of the tree. So usually like the south or southwestern side of the trees where the sun's like really hitting it hard. Examples of that are here. So what we just saw with the normal browning, again, is those needles closer to the bark. Now this would be closer to the tip. So if you're seeing brown tips or yellowing tips, that's likely heat damage. And so maybe this turns into flagging or thinning or dieback or something, and maybe this is just the beginning of negative symptoms that will lead to death. Okay, so those are the different dieback symptoms that you can record. Now I'm just going to go into some of the other data that they ask you to collect. Again, I think it's fine if you leave these things blank, but they're just some of the ones that I'm like, oh, this could potentially tell a compelling story, especially if you're tracking these trees over time. So one of those is percent canopy affected. So you're not using any specialized tool or anything. This is just a visual observation. So I just wanted to kind of explain how I go about it. So, you know, this is just a 2D example here because it's a photo, but of course, when you're out in the field, you're going to want to look around the entire tree, the entire canopy, to see what percent is effective. So yeah, something like this is really just going to help track that dieback over time. So, you know, say you go to this tree, I would say that this tree, you know, based on the 2D photo, is about 40% affected. And then, you know, maybe I go and look at the tree next year and it's more like 80%. I mean, that's pretty fascinating information to say that, you know, it increased 100%, the dieback increased 100% in just a year. And then you go back the next year and it's dead. I mean, that's exactly what the researchers are looking for, is to see like how quickly, you know, it went from flagging or top kill to completely dead. Or maybe it bounced back. Maybe you go back and it's recovered. Definitely positive situations can come as well. Another one that I think is pretty interesting is number and percent of other western red cedars within the site that are also unhealthy. So this was a really good photo. So say, you know, there's this very obvious not healthy one there. So I'd say that's the one I'm going to go study. So I'd record, you know, all the general data on there. And then for the number and percent of trees of other western red cedars that are unhealthy, see, I kind of just like mark them off here. So number 1's looking pretty good. Number 2, not so great. Number 3 definitely has some browning at the top of the canopy. Number 4 looks like there's browning. Number 5 looks pretty good. 6 has the top browning, and number 7's looking pretty good. So for this, I would estimate that the number of trees that are unhealthy are 3 out of the 7. So I would have the percentage of 43% of trees at this site are unhealthy. And if you wanted to record data on every single one of these trees, that would be great too. Are there signs or symptoms of insect disease or other damage? Some things are more obvious than others. But if you are thinking that might be the case, just take good photos. As you see in these examples here, it might be a situation where the bark has kind of fallen off if insects have made their way in, or there might be boreholes from different boring insects that have gotten into the tree. So if anything just looks kind of odd and out of place, you don't have to definitively be like, yes, this is some sort of insect damage, but you can say there's even an option to put not sure, and then you can take some photos, and then the researchers can decide on that. It also asks about, another good question is just other unhealthy plants in the area. So that other question was very specifically looking at other western red cedars, but is there also just like a patch of Oregon grape like surrounding the western red cedar that's just completely dead? That would be interesting to know. Then, you know, maybe it's something in the soil because everything around it, or something with the roots, or maybe there's a fungal pathogen in there that's like killing off things in the area. So it really helps point to the direction of issue if there are other things that are not doing well in the area. And so for that, a lot of those things I just mentioned, and also others, just any other maybe odd or out of place things going on. Fungal activity. Was the tree very heavily damaged by an animal? Is there mechanical damage, maybe from a feller buncher that was in there? Are there a bunch of invasive plants growing? Has there been soil compaction? If you're able to notice any of these things, it's an optional thing to record, but again, I think pretty important to know. Some other information, less about the tree, but more about the site. The site type. Are you in your backyard? Are you in the forest? Are you near a roadside? Are you just right on the forest edge, maybe by a trail? How close are you to water? Are you in kind of like an upland area or a valley or a wetland? Lastly, I mentioned this before, there's a notes section. This is great to be able to explain yourself. I think this is maybe insects boring into it, but it could be a woodpecker, I'm not sure. So I'm sure the field allows many characters, and you can type whatever you think is necessary to tell the researchers. That's kind of like your one chance to like speak to them about this. So please do not hold back in things that you want to include. I guess I'll say that the notes section is also where you can expand on some of those other questions that they asked. An example of that is the other unhealthy plant species. I think that you say like yes, and then have to go include the names in the notes section. It's really easy to follow in the app and making an observation. I'll send you all these additional resources. This is all made by the researchers. All these resources probably will have the answers to your questions. So yeah, I know that these researchers are grateful for your help. We're excited to be a part of this, even if it's not our own study. We recognize this as really important data to collect, and it's something that we've been kind of concerned about as well, because we've noticed it when we're out in the forest doing other projects. So greatly appreciate any help that you can give on this project. Unlike some of our other independent studies, you don't need to coordinate with us or get in contact with us if you're going out to do this. There's no data that comes back to us. This is simply us just letting folks know about an opportunity, and I'll give you all this information and then you'll be good to go. So thank you so much.